One of those was Martin Delaney. Martin Delaney was the fabric of this conference. I heard Martin Delaney speak at AIDS Minnesota, which I patterned this conference after, back in 1992. I was so impressed with this man and his knowledge. He had been a 5th grade school teacher. He wasn't a medical person, but he became one. Because I sit on all these research committees with all these scientists and doctors, I can't tell you the number of times that they told me how much Marty taught them that they should be teaching him. He was that smart. You heard Dr. Sag talk about Larry Kramer. Well, Larry Kramer was the in-your-face activist. Martin was the quiet-spoken advocate. They really had a partnership that a lot of people wasn't aware of. You had Larry out there chaining himself to the White House, throwing blood, dumping bodies sometimes out of caskets. I mean, anything to get people's attention and put fear. He shut down the FDA for a week or more, you know. And so none of those people wanted to deal with Larry Kramer. So what was next? In walks Martin Delaney, somebody that could speak their language, that they could sit across the table, where they were intimidated by Larry. Larry's message was getting to them through Marty. And so after I got approval to start this conference, the first person I called was Marty. I always called him Marty. A lot of people call him Martin, but I said, Marty, I have a proposition. I said, you so impressed me at AIDS Minnesota, and I went back 2 or 3 years in a row, and he was always there. I said, I live in the panhandle of Florida. Education has not made it here. I said, we're still on one drug regimen because the medical community's not been educated. The consumers haven't been educated. Nobody's empowered. I said, we need that message because these people can't afford to go traveling to conferences in big cities to get this information. We need to bring it to them. I said, but let me explain to you. I work for an agency. Our total budget's $35,000, and here I am trying to put on a conference for several hundred people. I said, so I need you to work with me, if you will. And at that time, Project Inform, their entire budget came from Marty's speaking engagements. He spoke all over the world, actually. And honorariums were pretty hefty back then. And it's not that Marty was getting any of the money. It was going to keep the project going because they didn't get any government funds or anything. So he said, what can you pay me? I said, I can make a check to Project Inform for $500 and I can pay your air travel. He says, my board's not going to like that, but I'm going to do it. So he came. He always did our treatment update, and he did that every year. He missed one conference because he had a heart attack the day before, but sent somebody in his place. And up until the day he died, he was always here and was our biggest cheerleader. Because the second year, before I could call him, he called me and he says, I have a proposition for you. If you will let me come back to Positive Living, I will do it for the same fee. He says, I'll make you this offer. I will do that every year you will have me there. There will never be an increase. I said, come on. You know. And he said, the reason why, he said, I speak all over the world. He said, I've never been anywhere where people were so hungry for information. I have to feed them. And feed them he did. And he changed the fabric of North Florida. All of a sudden, people were speaking up. People were asking, why can't we get this? The funding disparity at that time in the Panhandle, we weren't getting per person, on per capita basis, anything. I mean, a third of what anybody else in the state. Our life, because of our zip code, was less valuable to people providing the funding. Well, Martin energized people, and they started speaking up and demanding things, and things changed here. And originally this conference was just a local conference for local consumers and medical providers, because at that time the medical providers weren't getting any training. Well, after about year 3, the AETC started taking their educational program on the road, so those people that were coming here to get medical credits every year no longer needed to come. But what was happening is the clients were talking to their friends and getting more and more. And so eventually it became a consumer conference. And at that time there were several of those conferences around the country. We're the only one that survived. And here we are 20 years later. If Kathy Robinson was here tonight, she would say, and your program is a picture of Martin Delaney. You cut it out, you put it on your refrigerator, and every time you take a pill or any time you thank this man for your life. You may not have known him, but if it hadn't have been for him, we would not be where we are. You would not have the health you enjoy. Martin Delaney has saved your life. And she tells a story about him saving her life. So at this time, I want to invite all the former recipients of the Martin Delaney Power of One Award to come up on stage. The reason we named this award the Power of One, the year that Marty died, we had been planning a whole year to have him at this conference, and CNN had agreed to film his life story, how one person could make a difference. And unfortunately, right before the conference, Marty, who suffered from hepatitis, from being in a lot of hepatitis drug trials, ended up passing away before we could do that. So since we didn't get to do the video, we decided to honor him every year with the Martin Delaney Power of One HIV/AIDS advocacy work, and it goes to an advocate associated with positive living every year. We've had 8 recipients thus far. Tonight will be the 9th. And at this time, I'm going to ask Dr. Paul Ahrens to come back to the mic, and he's going to introduce you to this year's recipient.
Thank you, Butch, and it's quite an honor to be amongst this august company. I wrote some notes on the back of an envelope here to help me out with this introduction. Our recipient, I think, will recognize who he is shortly here if he hasn't already, but I'll just start sort of anonymously and see how long it takes. And by the way, I want to mention too that Martin Delaney founded the Fair Pricing Coalition, at which I'm privileged to be a member, which continues to discuss and negotiate with pharmaceutical manufacturers to try to keep the prices under control. It's very hard to do. In fact, you know the drugs are overpriced, but the fact is we do try to keep a little bit of a restraint on it, and it's just an example of Martin Delaney's vision and that it continues on. Well, this year's Power of One awardee lists his credentials as PhD parenthesis ABD, which I thought meant about to be done, but he says it means all but dissertation. He's a long-term survivor, diagnosed in 1987 with HIV. He also has a committed spousal relationship with his partner Brian over 24 years of time. Starting to get the picture. Yeah. He has served as an advocate and activist on a number of work groups for the state of Florida. That includes the AICP, the AIDS Insurance Continuation Project, the ADAP work group, for which he was a very effective member. A lot of the medications that we added to the formulary of ADAP. He played an active role in debating, discussing, and ultimately in the approval of adding them. The Florida Community Planning Group. The Ryan White Title 1 and 2, as parts A and B were at the time, planning groups. The Tampa AIDS Network, where he was a volunteer. He would participate in trips to Washington for AIDS Watch and lobbying in the capital, Tallahassee. He also developed, and I think by now you know we're talking about Joseph Lennox Smith. He also developed a program called TASK, the AIDS Survival Kit, and every year at this conference does a presentation which he does questions and answers about government programs, benefit programs, Medicaid and Medicare in particular. I attended the program that he did today, and I can tell you he's better than ever. I mean, accurate information, articulately presented. He fields questions and really provides useful information to people to make sure that they get the benefits to which they're entitled. So let's say a few things that aren't official listings here. Joe, no, all good. Joe is so generous. I mean, at the presentation today, he gave out his private phone numbers, asked people to call him if they had any questions. He doesn't begrudge his time. He's all about giving service. I know that he's a gifted carpenter and construction worker. He's practically rebuilt a beautiful house down in Tampa. In his earlier days, he was an over-the-road truck driver. He drove 18-wheelers for his family business. He was also a petty officer in the U.S. Navy. This is a very talented and a guy with a lot of diverse background. He mentioned today, and I remember, that at one point he was on crutches. I also remember that he had lipodystrophy. And through sheer force of will and intellect and determination, he has overcome those things. He's now a spry, almost senior citizen. So I mean, these are all. I think you'll agree with these accomplishments. He's a worthy recipient of this year's Power of One award, and I'll let the presentation go with what.
Would you come up here, Joseph? It's with great pride the Positive Living Conference proudly presents the Martian Delaney Power of One HIV/AIDS Advocacy Award to Joseph Lennox Smith for outstanding individual service to the HIV/AIDS community, September the 16th, 2017, Oasis.
Old hippies never die. No, but now I know what it was all about. All day, people have been picking at me, asking me, well, what about this? What about that? What did you do? Oh, you were in the Navy. Oh, yeah. You know, I'm feeling, my lover calls me from Tampa and starts giving me the 3D about, 3rd degree about what committees I was on because somebody he worked with wanted to know. I said, why would they want to know that stuff? You know, this is strange. And you know, and
how strange is it?
And I had no clue what was going on until I started to walk out of the room, and he says, where are you going? I said, I'm going to, I said, I'm going out. I'm smoke. He says, no, you're not. And I said, what? So anyway, I went down my room, got my pipe, and took a piss. And then I started wondering what the hell he was talking about. And so then I was standing down there in line for the elevator. You know what I'm talking about. And it started to dawn on me. What the hell is he talking about? And then somebody else says, you're in trouble, you left the room. I said, who cares if I leave the room? But seriously, folks, this has been some adventure for me. It didn't start out the best of ways. I was in a relationship with someone I loved dearly, and I was in the Navy at the time, and I had never asked my other half about HIV or anything like that because I was getting tested on a regular basis through the Navy. Every time I had to go on duty, active duty, they tested me, and I was always negative. And I just didn't want to broach this subject too much at home. But anyway, I come back from active duty, and I'd been away for a while, and I was ready. So anyway, things got more heated than usual, and we had been together for 9 years. I had never. Oh, that's good. Hey, it's plastic. It won't break like that damn thing ADAP sent us. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. No.
Mine broke too.
Yeah, but anyway, they didn't even present it to me. They sent it in a box that was busted. So anyway, I'm sorry. But no, but I like it. It's really pretty, and I love it. David, you can tell them that, or anybody. Anyway, so so I came back, and a couple of weeks later, I was sent to Jacksonville for what was called damage control. And so what they do is they stick you in a metal box with all these pipes and stuff and holes in the wall, and then they commence to flooding it with water, and then you got to stop it up before you drown. That's what the Navy does to you. And my group didn't do too well, and it was ice cold water, and we went floating up to the top of this tank. And then later that day, I'd start to running down the beach, and I get all cramped up, and I just about fell down, and I barely made it back. I run out about a mile or so from the hotel, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I got back to the hotel, and I first thing I did when I went back home was I went to my doctor, and I said, "What the heck? You know, test me for everything. You know, this was crazy." So they tested me and found out that. It's 1987, April the 17th, 1987. At around, yeah. And anyway, that's the day I became positive, I remember. But anyway, the doctor came in, had never given this result before to anyone. And I could tell by the look on her face what the news was. And it was that I was HIV positive. And so I had to go home and have that discussion with my other half. You just can't imagine what a beautiful person this was. And then we had my other half tested, and apparently my other half had had it for quite some time. And 4.5 years later, my other half died in my arms at home. And it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But my favorite saying is, it's hard to hit a moving target. So you have to keep moving. And I did. And and I wound up getting very involved. And not too long after that, I became a speaker for NAPWA, the National Association of People with AIDS. Joined their Speakers Bureau and several others. I used to do the USCA conferences, and I did a presentation every year until they stopped paying my airfare. They just sent 3 of my concepts and then wouldn't pay for me to come. So I said, sorry, I ain't got no money, sonny. But anyway, and then I was lucky enough to meet Butch. At the same time, I met Martin Delaney at AIDS, Minnesota. And I was just lucky that day to have hit gold. And I made a wonderful friend, 2 wonderful friends. Martin was just, you know, he just hanging around and asked me for a ride to the hotel. So I said, okay, I'll take you. Brian was with me, and now Brian and I, who is negative, Brian and I have been together for 24 years. And I wish the heck you were here. But it didn't work out this year that he could come. But anyway, I've done, at some point you start to feel irrelevant as we get older sometimes. And something like this can make that feeling go away. But I want to tell you how much pleasure it's been to be here all but one of these conferences. And Butch, along with Kathy, have been some of my staunchest supporters for the years. Some of you may remember the program that I wrote, TASS, the AIDS Survival Kit. We also put it out in audio, and we gave it as a pre-conference here for years. And it was a program for people newly diagnosed, so they would have a head start on what was coming. So, and I thank Butch so much for allowing me into his life and this conference. And I want to tell you how much it means to be here and to continue to serve here. It means a great deal to me. And I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for letting me be here. Thank you.
And all of these people on the stage have also been recipient of that award, so let's give them a round of applause. And I don't know where Pat is, she's here somewhere, but she's also a recipient at Kelly. Okay, I know it's late, and I know everybody wants to get to the dance. It doesn't start for another 25 minutes. But anyway, I had about an hour worth of speech to tell my story, but my story is going to become the Cliff Note version.
You can take your hour.
You know, a lot of people over the course of this weekend have talked about our history. You heard Dr. Sag last night take us medically from day one of where we were, where we are now, where we're headed. I mean, Jean a while ago. I mean, the history of Ryan White and what she went through. And I think of all the other mothers that have gone through that. You know, there's stories, so many that need to be heard. You know, and I tell people, someday, maybe in retirement, I'll have time to write that book because all those stories are so important. You can't tell them all. But one of the things that stands out in my life is I've been, in a couple of months, it'll be 29 years that I've been involved, that you've welcomed me into your family. because I, like Mark Delaney, is an ally of the community. I will never, ever say I know what you're going through, because I don't. But I will honestly say I stand and watch and learn from you every day. I'm in awe of your courage, your spirit, your fight, your willingness to give, your unselfishness. I have learned so much on this journey. 1988, I had not thought anything about HIV and AIDS. I'd seen a couple of stories on TV about young gay men in New York City and San Francisco coming down with some kind of gay cancer. And I thought, well, I don't live in either one of those cities, so nothing I have to concern myself. Even though I had lived in New York City in the 60s and 70s, I was no longer there. I was living in Alabama, so I was safe. You know, it just wasn't something I spent a lot of time thinking about. And then it was that year in December that changed everything I thought about HIV and AIDS and everything that would direct me from that point on. You've heard mention of a promise I made to a friend. I want to share that relationship with you tonight. His name was Tivis, Tivvis. Very unusual name for a very unusual man. Out, proud, gay, was proud of the fact that his legal name, last name, was Faggart. He said, so if they're writing that on my locker, you know, it's true. But Tivis was one of a kind. You know, you talk about, and people's heard me say he was my best friend, but that really doesn't describe Tivis. We use that term best friend so often. You know, my best friend this year may not be my best friend next year. You know what I'm talking about. That relationship I had with Tivis far transcended best friend. He was my soulmate. We were connected on so many levels, mentally, socially, spiritually. And we had this unique thing that happened to the two of us. Have you ever had a friend that could read your mind? Mm-hmm. You know, we all say that. But this was somewhat different. We could carry on, and we traveled together a lot. We could carry on a conversation. I remember going to Gainesville from Birmingham once. Never spoke a word, and we had an entire conversation on that trip. He would ask me a question in his mind, and I would answer it. We had that tight connection, and I'd never had that with anybody else. All of our friends called it spooky. We called it cool. You know, we thought that was neat. But anytime either one of us was ever in trouble, because we started moving in different places. He moved to Texas, I moved to New Orleans, then I moved to Florida, and he moved to Colorado. And, you know, we always kept in touch, not weekly, not monthly, but remember, we had that cool, spooky relationship, so we were always connected. And so on that December the 29th, 1988, Daryl and I are packing to go to New Orleans for the New Year. And all of a sudden, my gut instinct says, something's wrong. There's something wrong with Tivis. I've got to call him. So I dialed the number. It was disconnected. My heart sank. I told Daryl, go to New Orleans, I'm not going. He said, you're going? I said, no, something's wrong with Tivis, and I'm not leaving until I get connected with him. Well, it took him about a day and a half, but he finally convinced me to go on to New Orleans. We come back on January the 3rd. And in my family, we were big into reading newspapers. I never read Time. I'm like you. But we were big into reading newspapers. And it was a joke in our family that my father started. He always said, when you pick up the newspaper, the first thing you do is read the obituaries. And if you're in there, you don't have to go to school or work. So every day I would get up and read the obituaries, see if I had to go to school. And darn it, I had to go every day. But To this day, I still read the obituaries first. So we were unpacking. We had all these newspapers on the front porch that had come in while we were gone. So I'm going through the obituary in each one of them, and there it was. There it was. Tivis's mother, and Tivis was a mama's boy, had died on December the 29th, just when I had that feeling. And I called the funeral home. I said, and they said, you missed the service. It was this morning. I said, well, I need to get in touch with Tivis. Was he there? Do you have his phone number? And I knew something was wrong when they said he wasn't able to make it. We don't have his number. Shirley, his sister, we have her number. And I said, well, give that to me. So I called Shirley, and she said, I'll call you back, Butch. I'm on the phone, actually, to Tivis on the other line. And he's in the hospital in Denver with pneumonia. Well, all those news stories I had ignored, all of a sudden, front and center in my mind. And when she said pneumonia, I knew Tivis has AIDS. A few minutes later, the phone rings. It's not Shirley, it's Tivis. He confirms my fears, and we cried together. After that, we talked on the phone every week. I planned to go see him in March. The day I was to leave, I got a phone call. He said, don't get on the plane. I said, why? What's wrong? He said, my father died, and I'm coming to Birmingham for the funeral. Meet me tomorrow at the church. I got overwhelmed with emotions. One, I was so excited that I was going to at last be with him. Secondly, I was saddened by the circumstances. But third, and most important to me at the time, I was scared to death as to what he would look like. Because those same newscasts that I had ignored, I could remember the images. Wasted bodies, almost skeletal, covered in purple lesions. I think, will he look like that? Will I recognize him? I was relieved the next day. He was a very, very handsome man. And he still was just that handsome. So I was pleased there. In fact, just so you can see him later, I brought his picture. But anyway, Tivis and I, it was a love story. We were never lovers, but we were always in love. We even tried the friends with benefit things a couple of times and giggled all the way through it. So this was not a romantic love. It was much deeper, I always said. And so after his father's funeral, he was driving me to the airport to see if I could get a refund on my ticket since I hadn't used it. And he started talking about his living with AIDS. I was very uncomfortable. I knew nothing about it. I didn't want him to have it. I didn't want to talk about it. So I kept changing the subject. He was upset with me and that behavior. And he said, we're going to talk about this. And I said, no, we're not. And Tivis did crazy things always. We're on the interstate in Birmingham. He stops the car in the middle lane of the interstate, takes the keys out, and said, we are not moving till you agree to talk to me. Fearing for my safety, I said, okay, pull over. And for the next hour, maybe even longer, we had a conversation that only two people in love could have had under the circumstances. And when the conversation was over, he leaned over, kissed me on the neck, and whispered in my ear. He said, I know you can do this. I want you to promise me something. Because I had been begging him to come back to Birmingham so I could, quote, take care of him. And he said, I can't do that. He said, I have a good support network in Denver, and I'm very fortunate because most people don't. He told me unimaginable stories. I didn't believe him, that parents kicked their kids out, that people lost their jobs, kicked out of their housing, and they had no one. And he said, so I want you to promise me that you'll get involved and make a difference in the life of one person living with AIDS. He emphasized one. And I would have traded places with him. I would have given my life for him. So of course I said yes, not knowing what that would mean or what would happen with it. And so I didn't know it at the time. That would be the last day we were ever together. Shortly after going back to Denver, he passed. And in our strange, supernatural, spooky, cool way, he's the one that notified me. In the South, we have an old saying. We have lots of old sayings in the South. If a bird flies into your house, someone you love dies. Has anybody else ever heard that? Yeah, a lot of you. So it was a beautiful Saturday morning. I had come down the steps. Daryl was out raking leaves by the lakefront, had left the door open. So when I entered the living room, a bird flew by my head. And I said, I knew. That was from Tivis. So I go outside and I told Daryl, Tivis just died. He said, the phone didn't ring. Did Howard call you? That was Tivis's lover. I said, no one called. Well, how do you know? I said, Tivis told me. He said, there's you go again with that supernatural crap that nobody but you and Tivis believes. Tivis is fine. Just go about, finish cleaning the house. I knew not to argue. So at 4:20 that afternoon, Howard calls and says, I got bad news. I said, you don't have to tell me. Tivis died. He said, did Shirley call you? And I said, no, Tivis told me. He had the same reaction Daryl had. Until I said, confirm something for me. Did Tivis die at 10:15 this morning? He got totally silent. He couldn't speak for about 3 or 4 minutes. He says, my God, it's true. He said, you know, I'll be honest, for years I've been jealous of the connection you two had. Felt like I should be the one that had that connection, but we didn't. I said, that doesn't mean anything. We didn't ask for this. It was just a gift from God. I assured him that Tivis loved him. And so that comforted him. So a month or so later, I went to Denver because Tivis' request was that only Howard and I spread his ashes. And Tivis was a big meditator. He could meditate for hours. And he wouldn't go to his bedroom to do that. He had this special place he meditated. It was in a Federal Reserve park in New Mexico. And he had his own little spot on the hillside. Ugliest place I'd ever seen, I swear to God. The desert, I'm not about desert. A few cactus and stuff on the ground and rocks. And but that's where he wanted his ashes spread. And so we made the journey to New Mexico, and we laid him to rest in his special place as we played his favorite music on a boombox. And as I spread those ashes, the promise came to my mind, and I repeated it out loud, but then I whispered to him, send me a guide, Tivis. I don't know what to do. And sure enough, he did. I get back to Birmingham, there again with the newspaper, read the obits. Then I turned to the front page. When I got back to Birmingham, did Birmingham have an AIDS organization? I didn't know. Did anybody in Birmingham even have AIDS? I didn't know anybody that did. And on the front page of the paper was an article. The Names Project AIDS Memorial Quilt comes to Birmingham this weekend, volunteers needed. So I immediately signed up for a 2-hour shift. And if any of you have ever been to the national display of the quilt, or a local one, you had one today. The quilt speaks volumes, all those voices, all those stories. Changed my life forever. My 2-hour shift by the weekend was over, turned into 20 plus hours. I was so moved. But also, more importantly, that weekend, I met some very special people. I met a wonderful lady named Evelyn Scherer that was starting a buddy program at Birmingham AIDS Outreach. So I became a founding member of that. And later became an educator and trainer for that program. But also that same weekend, I met Dr. Michael Sack. And I don't know why we clicked, but we did. I didn't think much about it. 2 weeks later, a good friend of mine, Bob Hill, calls and says, Dr. Sack would like to see you. Can you meet with him? I said, yeah, sure. And that's when he explained, like we talked about last night, the clinic host thing. Because he was a firm believer in having a partnership with his patients. Because in the South, like I've stated so many times, you never question 4 people. You didn't question your minister, your policeman, your fireman, or your doctor. You just did what they said. And that didn't work for Mike Sag. He said, it won't work for my patients. So as host, we were the introduction to getting people to open up and talk to their doctors, because they would talk to us and tell us anything. And we would let them know we're going to share that information if it's okay with you with the doctor. And almost invariably they would say, yes, I just can't tell him myself. So it greatly improved the relationship and the quality of health. So under the direction and leadership of Mike Sag, I got that training and those tools that I could finally keep that promise to Titus. It wasn't long after that that one person I'd promised to help came into my life. His name was Johnny Williamson. He was from Enterprise, Alabama, and he was one of the good old boys. Not only did he could have passed for a twin for Jeff Foxworthy. Not only did he look like him, he sounded like him, and he was equally as funny. Daryl and I both fell in love with him in no time and invited him to move in and live with us. We lived on a small lake in North Alabama, and Johnny loved it there. Johnny had been married previously, had 2 teenage kids. Another Southern, not saying, but tradition is then he discovered he was gay, which is always a thing in the South. But anyway, he always had this dream of having his own place, and he just couldn't afford it. Well, after about 6 months of him living with us, a little log cabin on the other side of the lake went to foreclosure. And with that, I met with some of his friends and an attorney that had done a lot for Johnny, and we were able to secure funds so that he could get the log cabin. The last year of his life, health-wise, was horrendous, but it was also the happiest year of his life. He got his dream, and that dream was home ownership. So many of my other friends had hopes and dreams too that were never realized. And I promised to each and every one of them that their dreams would become my dreams, and I would do everything in my power to accomplish those for them in their name. Tibbs knew me better than I knew myself, and he knew when he asked me to help one person that he knew once I did that, I couldn't stop. So here I am 29 years later, and so grateful to have the opportunity to continue to play a small part. And it is a small part. Like I said, I had gotten so much more than I've ever given. I usually don't speak at these conferences. I plan the program, but I don't ever put myself on it except to make introductions. But with this being the 20th anniversary, I decided to I think in the 20-year history, I've spoken 3 times. So, and I don't do presentations, I do what I call chats. I just like to talk with you. And over that period of time, my life has been so enriched by so many of you and so many that are no longer here. In the early days of Positive Living, on that closing day, we would all hug each other, but sadly knowing that it would be the last time we would hug some people. And sure enough, year after year, we were haunted with the absences, the people that weren't there anymore. And over time, those absences got fewer and fewer and fewer. And so look around the room tonight. It's my prayer that every one of you will be back next year and that I can hug you again. I am not going to allow any absences next year due to death. You got it? Okay? You're going to live. You're going to thrive. And, God love all of you. This journey has taken me so many places, and that year I spoke the last, I shared a lot of those stories with you. I talked about a young man named Jay who was found demented on the streets of Atlanta. His family in Panama City had kicked him out because he had AIDS and because he was gay. The police brought him to Panama City and said, "You will take care of your son." They came to my office. She was not happy. She was very resentful. She didn't like her son, unlike Gene. God love you. But they came to my office and they made a promise to each other. She said, "I'll let you live in my house if you promise to be baptized." He said, "I can do that, but you've got to promise to cremate me." So they shook hands and agreed with it on that. It wasn't long until Jay got really sick, took a turn for the worse. It was a cold February night, actually. He was in bed with PCP pneumonia, toxoplasmosis, CMV, and thrush so bad he couldn't swallow. And I think he had one other, and I don't remember what it was right now. But all of a sudden, Mama realized he hadn't been baptized. She calls her minister, 1 a.m. in the morning. He comes to the house. The two of them pick him up, take him outside, and baptize him in an unheated swimming pool. He dies a couple of hours later. And then, a few days later, she has a funeral and not cremation. And I'm talking to some people after the service, and she comes up to me and she says, "Do you think I'm a bad mother for not cremating him?" And this is so unlike me, so untypical of me, because I try to be nice to everybody, but I just turned to her, looked her straight in the eye, and I said, "Not only are you a bad mother, there's a special place in hell for mothers like you." And my friends were just, "How can you say that to a grieving mother?" And I said, "She's not grieving. She is celebrating that she no longer has this burden in her family, this shame that he brought to the family. It's gone now." And I don't usually say that. And she probably was grieving in her own way. But, you know, she had a strange way of showing it. I also had a wonderful young lady who was Jewish. Her name was Star. Star was a nurse. Star was also a great advocate. As she fought HIV, she fought another disease called stigma. And she had changed doctors, and the new doctor said, "How is it that a nice lady like you could get AIDS? Only people that are gay and bad get this disease." And she looked at him, she says, "It's none of your damn business. It's your business to treat me. If you can't do that without judgment, then I'll find somebody else." She was the best trainer and educator I had that I took into the schools. Teenagers loved her. And we had this memorial Christmas tree that I'd started years ago where we would make ornaments in memory of the people we had lost. And so she came to me one day, just shortly before she died. She says, "You know, I don't have long." She says, "I'm not Christian, I'm Jewish. But I want on that tree, damn it." She said, "I want a Star of David with my name on it." And she got it. You know, and we broke so many laws. I talked about Marty, and he always talked about transporting drugs across the Mexican border because we couldn't get them approved in this country. I told you about Leroy, who had died in Birmingham, and at the time, no funeral home in the whole state of